Hello, everyone. I'm Ross. I'll be the host today. We'll get started in just a second. Just want to confirm that you can see me and hear me. So just let me know in the chat section if I'm coming through. Cool, cool. Thank you all. Thank you. Started. Welcome to today's webinar. Really excited to be here. Really excited that you're joining us. Really excited that you're joining us for this one. My name is Ross Reinhardt. I'm the Director of Content and Instruction here at lsat-flex. That just means I get to make the resources and support our instructors who all help our students earn life-changing door-opening LSAT score increases. I've been working full-time in the LSAT prep space for almost 10 years now, which means I can hopefully speak to the topic of today's webinar, how to study for the LSAT, as a very experienced person. At the very least, I can speak to it as an old person now. But I've loved spending this time, 10 years going on it, working with countless students, creating resources, doing courses, managing teams of instructors. And because I mostly work behind the scenes now, it's a pleasure to get to hop on these webinars and meet with prospective law students like you. I'm also very fortunate to have made my home at lsat-flex for the last year because I truly believe that lsat-flex offers our students the most support for the best price. And I'll get into all of that later in the session, how lsat-flex could help you. But what I want to focus on for the next hour is how to study for the LSAT. Now, I'm going to start by providing you with 4 study principles for the LSAT that I think are the most important points for you to take away from today's lesson. Now, after seeing all of the different habits and approaches adopted by successful and less successful LSAT students over the years, I developed these principles to help make sure that your LSAT experience is productive and efficient and maybe even enjoyable. These are the principles that I wish I knew about the LSAT before I started studying for the LSAT. I'll use the rest of the presentation after going over these 4 principles to discuss each principle one by one in depth, so you know how you can apply those principles to your study plan. Finally, at the end, I'll tell you a little bit about how lsat-flex approaches the LSAT and how we can help you improve your LSAT score. Finally, at the end of today's presentation, I'll answer any lingering questions that you have. If you have a question that you'd like for me to answer at the end of today's webinar, go ahead and put that in the Q&A section of the webinar. We'll be talking to each other during the presentation, through the chat section mostly. If you have a question about what I'm going over, you can put that in the chat section. But if there's a question you'd like to answer at the end, the easiest place for me to access that will be that Q&A section, not the chat, but the Q&A. So we've got a lot to cover today, a lot to talk about with respect to how to study for the LSAT, in addition to LSATs and the discount and all of that. But before we get to any of that, I want to have a little warm up. Well, icebreaker. These webinars always work better if you're active and engaged in the chat section and asking questions, answering my questions, and so on. So I want us to get used to using that section. Also want to learn a little bit more about you. So just an easy question I'd like you to respond to in the chat section. Go ahead and make sure that is set to everyone so we can all hear each other in the chat section. I'll see our responses. And just let me know, what is your #1 dream law school that you hope to attend? Or else we're going to talk about studying for the LSAT today. But the whole point of studying for the LSAT is to get into that law school. So go ahead and let me know what your #1 dream school is, the one you put up on your dream board or whatever, to try to manifest your acceptance to that. Of course, no wrong answers here. Okay, well, a lot of responses coming in quickly. We've got NYU, Virginia, Case Western, USC Gold, my alma mater, Georgia, FAMU Law, UCLA, Georgetown, more, Loyola, NYU. All right. NC, a lot of Georgetown, a lot of UCLA, getting some interesting responses. Cool. Well, want to wish you all the best of luck with those goals. We'll talk about how to effectuate those goals in today's lesson, how to study for the LSAT. So now that you've told me your goals and aspirations, we're going to discuss how to achieve them. We'll start by laying out those 4 study principles that I think everyone studying for the LSAT should know. So what are these principles? Well, the first principle is to make and follow a plan. First, it's really important to make and follow a plan. Far too many test takers do not study for the LSAT with a plan. They don't know how long they're going to study. They don't know when they're going to study, and they don't know how much time they need to reserve every day for studying. That's a bad idea. Many test takers might end up shelling out a lot of money for a course to study for the LSAT, and they take this course at the same time that they're studying for finals or going through a really busy period of work or dealing with multiple lawsuits at that time. That's a true story from a past student. All of that means that they can't get the most out of that course. So those thousands of dollars they may have spent don't get them to the law school they want to attend. So it's so important that you have a plan. And part of your plan includes figuring out how long you'll have to study and when you'll study. How long should you study? Well, as we are going to discuss, 180 hours of studying is the bare minimum amount of time you should plan for. That's a number, it's a round number, it's easy to remember because of course 180 is the best score you can get on the LSAT, but even though that's the maximum score, that's the bare minimum amount of time we should plan for. It depends. It'll also need to be a sound, reliable plan that makes sure you understand all of the facets of the exam that you need to understand in order to achieve your target score. Now, our discussion of what this sound and reliable plan should look like will be the bulk of what we discuss in today's lesson. Now, second principle is that consistency matters. It's also critical that we study consistently. You're probably in school right now. Maybe you're working full time. But if you are in school, and if you're anything like what I was when I was in school, you do a lot of your studying in the nights, or I'll be honest with you, in my case, the night before an exam. But that kind of cramming is not going to cut it on the LSAT. As we'll see, studying for the LSAT tests skills and concepts that are new to most people. And it takes time to train ourselves to understand these skills and concepts. In a way, we're kind of rewiring our brains to identify new patterns on this test. And that's a difficult thing to do, to rewire your brain, but it's possible. These skills, these concepts, they're learnable as long as we study regularly. We recommend trying to do at least 20 hours per week, spread out over as many that we can. And that's a lot, which brings us to the next point, the fourth principle: don't just find time, make time for studying for the LSAT. Finding those 20 hours every week is difficult if you're a full-time student or worker, but I've worked with hundreds of busy students to help them find more time to dedicate to the LSAT. So I want to give you some tips about how to find this time to make sure you can implement your study plan successfully. To preview my big tips, it's all about scheduling time for the LSAT and making some small temporary sacrifices, which isn't the most fun thing in the world, but it's necessary for most to make those big life-changing score increases. That's point number 3. Point number 4, our final study principle, is actually a principle that has to do with changing our mindset when we study for the LSAT. That mindset is one in which we embrace mistakes. It's a change in attitude for those of us studying for the LSAT, all about embracing mistakes. Now, I want to kind of go on a little personal digression, a little personal anecdote of mine. Back when I was studying for the LSAT, I actually had a good time studying for the LSAT, which I know may be kind of a strange thing to hear, especially if you've already been studying for the LSAT. But for the most time, I look back at my time studying for the LSAT with a certain amount of fondness. I enjoyed the process. Now, I didn't enjoy the process because I was like naturally gifted at studying for the LSAT or naturally gifted at the LSAT. My first exam score would prove otherwise. And I don't think it's because I'm especially smart. I've worked with a lot of people, and I can assure you that the vast majority of people that I've worked with in this space are more naturally gifted, more smart, more smart about this test than I was initially. I truly believe, though, that I had a good time studying for the LSAT because I had a hobby that was all about embracing mistakes. I've been skateboarding very poorly since I was about 12. When I skate, I fall a lot. I make a lot of mistakes on that thing. But by the time I was studying for the LSAT, I had accrued about 10 years of experience making a lot of mistakes on a skateboard. And in that time, I got really good at embracing mistakes. I fell constantly and just had to get back on the board, hop on it, figure it out. That's the attitude you want to embrace when studying for the LSAT. I learned it through this hobby, but the people who enjoy their process of studying for the LSAT the most are those who learn to not only tolerate mistakes, but to get excited by them. Because those mistakes are how we learn about ourselves, our habits, and they're how we devise solutions to actually improve our score on this test. They're how we learn. We'll talk about how to embrace these mistakes, catalog our mistakes, learn from these mistakes, devise solutions at the end of today's lesson. So these are the big 4 study principles that I want you all to have. I want you all to remember as you're studying for the LSAT. If you take nothing else from this session, these are the 4 big points. But like I said, we're going to be going over each of them in detail throughout most of today's presentation. Before we do that, I just want to hit on some LSAT basics. Just make sure we're all starting on the same page. Has anyone here, you can let me know in the chat, has anyone here like never taken a full LSAT before? Completely new to the idea. Okay, fair amount of us. So this section will be important for us. Oh, the flex counts, Judy. The flex is essentially what the full LSAT is now. Anyways, if we've never taken the LSAT before, let's go over some basics behind this test. First of all, we're saying LSAT. What does it stand for? Well, it stands for the Law School Admissions Test. Sort of a self-explanatory title, right? It's the test you take to get into law school. You want to be able to apply to every American Bar Association accredited law school in the nation, you have to take the LSAT. Now, some schools do accept the GRE or some other alternative test for a small number of seats, but those options are very limited. If you're serious about law school, the LSAT is the test to take. The LSAT is an electronic test, one that you get to take as of now from your home on your own computer. And as you take it, you'll be observed by a remote proctor just to make sure that you're not cheating or anything. Now, on this test, there are 5 35-minute sections, but you'll only take 4 of those on the day of the test. On the day of the test, you will take 1 logical reasoning section, 1 reading comprehension section, 1 logic game section, and 1 unscored experimental section. So let's go over each. Start with the logical reasoning section right here. What is that? Well, that section features between 24 and 26 multiple choice questions. Each question has a brief paragraph, and usually that paragraph contains an argument. And then you'll be asked a question about that argument. They might ask you what's wrong with the argument. They might ask you what's the main conclusion in that argument. They might ask you how to make that argument better or worse, or maybe some beliefs or assumptions that the person making that argument has. You get between 24 and 26 of those, and you get 35 minutes to finish that section, answering as many of them correctly as you can. Next section I want to go over is a reading comp section. If you've taken any standardized test, in the US at least, in your life, you know the reading comp section. This one will feel familiar. I know how these goes. You get some very boring short passages and some questions about what you read in those passages. On the LSAT, you'll be required to read 4 passages and answer anywhere between 5 and 8 multiple choice questions about each passage. In total, among those 4 passages, you get between 26 and 28 questions. Usually that number is 27. Last one is the logic game section. You know, getting one of those, and this is a weird one that throws people for a loop. And it's likely something you've never encountered if you haven't taken the LSAT before. Now, a logic game will give you a situation, for example, 7 runners finishing a race one at a time. And then they'll give you some rules about that situation. For instance, this runner has to finish before this runner. These runners can't finish next to each other. This runner is either finishing first or last. Then you use those rules to figure out how that game, how that situation can play out. And then they ask you a bunch of questions about how that situation could play out. Each section has 4 games. Each game has somewhere between 5 and 7 multiple choice questions, totaling up between 22 and 24 questions. Usually that number is 23. Now there's also this unscored experimental section. That will be the last section that we'll be taking on test day. So this experimental section, and Anovia, this is going to answer your question actually. This will either be a second logical reasoning section, this experimental section, a second reading comp section, or second logic game section. The only difference is that the experimental section is unscored. Now here some of us are referring to the lsat-flex. Basically that was a version of the LSAT that was briefly used in 2020 and 2021. It's been since retired. Essentially what the lsat-flex was just these 3 sections without the experimental. In August of 2021, they reintroduced the experimental as the 4th section. And Clara, when I say the 4th section, I don't mean the 4th in order. In every single text, they mix up the order of these sections. It's not always going to be the case that it's the logic games first, logical reasoning section, second, reading comp third, experimental fourth. They'll be all mixed up. Sometimes the experimental might be the first section or the second section or whatever it is. The point is you're not going to know which one is the experimental section. You're going to have to do your best on all 4 sections, even though one of those sections will be unscored. And that might raise the question, why do they add an unscored section? Well, they do that to test out questions that will count on future exams. So it's a little annoying that on one of the most stressful days of your young life, taking this LSAT, you'll also be basically being used as a guinea pig, a test mouse for the makers of the LSAT. But you can't figure out which section is the experimental until the exam is over. So you just have to try your best on all 4 sections, even if one of them is not going to count. Finally, there's a 5th section that you'll need to get your score back. That's the writing section. This one over here. You don't have to do this on the day of the test though, although you can. We recommend doing it within a week of taking the LSAT. The writing section is just take at home essay, essentially. There's no need to really talk that much about it during this webinar because it's not something you should really dedicate much, if any, time studying for. It's not scored. It's a minuscule part of your application. The only thing that you need to know is that you need to have one approved writing sample approved by LSAC before they'll give you your score back. That's why we recommend doing this within a week of taking the test to make sure you get your score back as early as possible. So these are the 5 sections of the LSAT, the 3 scored sections, the 2 unscored sections. But what does the test require you to know? What do these sections actually test? What do you have to know to take these sections effectively? Well, the good news is that these sections do not require you to know a whole lot. You will not have to learn any new facts to take this test. However, you will need to train your brain to think about information in a very specific way. And that's because this exam tests logic and argumentation. Or to put it in the LSAT's words, it tests your ability to analyze arguments, understand arguments, and make valid deductions from facts. But to be honest, I don't really like thinking of the exam this way. It's kind of talking about it in terms of like logic, deductions, argument, evaluation, analysis, validity, blah, blah, blah. I think these words are a little stuffy, academic, alienating, a little boring. So let's put it another way. What does this test actually test? Well, the LSAT tests 3 different things: reading, thinking, and drawing. First, we have to read pieces of information and understand what they mean. That sounds simple, but it's actually an underrated and underestimated part of taking this test. And that's because the LSAT will write things in a deliberately confusing way. Why do they do that? Well, that's kind of how lawyers write. As you'll learn in law school, the people who get paid the most to write, lawyers, tend to be not so great at writing, or to put it more charitably, writing about the law, writing laws, very difficult, very complex. So the writing that you're going to encounter as a law student and as a lawyer is going to be very difficult to understand. Things get confusing very quickly, so the LSAT wants to test your ability to understand the kinds of sentences and paragraphs you'll encounter in law school. Fortunately, a good study plan will provide you with the tools to help you deconstruct what you've read, and these tools can not only help you on the test, but they can help you in law school if you choose to continue using them. The second thing it tests is if we think about the information we just read. Not only think about that information, but think about it like a lawyer. Well, how do lawyers think? Well, for one, they're huge nerds for structure. Laws, case briefs, court petitions, law firm memos. These are all highly structured, highly standardized documents. There's also this reading technique that you'll learn in law school called IRAC. That's an acronym for IRAC. You'll be employing that. And that's another way that lawyers think structurally. So part about thinking about what we've read on the LSAT is thinking about the structure. What conclusion is this person reaching? What's the evidence they use? What are the rules that they're following? Another way that lawyers think is that they think, you've probably heard this, argumentatively. They're argumentative people. You probably heard that. Maybe that's a reason why you are pursuing law school, because you are too an argumentative person. Well, that's part of this test as well. Lawyers are always looking for problems. They're looking for problems with the arguments they plan to make, so they can anticipate what the other side's going to say, so they can make their own argument stronger. And lawyers are definitely looking for problems in the arguments that their opponents are making. So the LSAT will test our ability to think this way too. We'll have to point out problems with the arguments we've read. We'll have to figure out how to strengthen and weaken those problems. Now, if you're worried that you're like a nice person, you're not an argumentative person, this kind of combative thought doesn't come naturally to you, don't worry. There's a system for thinking this way that is both learnable and reliable, and you can address that in your study plan. Finally, we have to learn how to draw. We have to draw connections between the various things we read. Just like a lawyer has to find connections between various laws and judicial decisions to make a strong argument, we have to find connections between different rules and facts contained by this test. And literally drawing out these connections on paper with a pencil is often the fastest, easiest way to do this. So yeah, not necessarily literally drawing like pictures, but actually mapping things out on a paper, so we can see how various pieces of information are connected. We'll do this the most on logic games and logical reasoning, but we can do it on reading comprehension as well. So that's our goal, to learn how to read, think, and draw like a lawyer, as these things get tested on the LSAT. I should also mention speed. I don't think I've mentioned speed yet. We're going to have to do all of these things very, very quickly, because the LSAT does not give us much time to do any of these things. So how are we going to learn how to do all of these things under the immense time constraints of the LSAT? Let's talk about how to study for the LSAT. What are the first steps that we're going to take? Well, the first steps of any study plan, number one item on the list is going to be to take a diagnostic test. I want us to pause on that word, diagnostic, for just a moment. What other word does that remind you of? Diagnostic. What other word kind of seems to be cut from the same cloth? All right. Yeah, exactly right, Sakshi. Diagnose. And that's the purpose of this first exam. We're just diagnosing. We want to figure out how good we are at reading, thinking, and drawing like a lawyer on day one. For most of us, we're not so good on day one. Most of us do not get a great score on day one. In other words, most of us are going to be a little concerned by the diagnosis we receive. I know I was. But no matter what the diagnosis is, there's going to be a cure. Whatever the diagnosis is, we can set it aside for quite some time and get to work. The next step is going to be to decide how we want to study for the LSAT. There's a few different ways we can go. You can pick an online course. LSAT Max is a good one of those. Those courses tend to provide a lot of flexibility because they're taught through lesson videos that you can work through at your own pace. The kind of nerdy insider term for that kind of class is asynchronous, if you're interested in knowing that. The benefit of a class like that is you can study when it's convenient for you. Plus, if something doesn't stick, you can always replay the lesson. If something is sticking, you want to go a little bit faster, you can start watching it at a faster speed. Another option is a classroom or live online class. These are classes that actually meet together, whether in person or virtually, to work through each lesson. There'll be a real person there leading these. That person is there to guide you through the concepts and answer questions. You'll also have to show up, actually get the lesson, and some of us need that kind of accountability. Or you can go through self-study books. This is the most affordable option. There are a lot on the market. Like an online course, you can go through these at your own pace and you can take them with you. The downside is the volume of material. Once you've kind of read through the entire book, it's hard to get extra practice. But no matter which route you decide to go with, you'll need to create a study schedule that works for you. And that brings us to our discussion of the first principle, making and following a plan. When creating a schedule, we need to make sure we are making a sound, proven plan that will help us achieve that score increase we want to make. Let's talk about what that plan looks like. So, first of all, how long will we be studying? We don't want to be those people who study for a very long time and only achieve a marginal score increase. We want to plan out how long this will take so we can block off time during this hopefully not too long part of our lives. So how long will it take? Well, we want to use our first diagnostic score and our target LSAT score to make an estimate of how long we'll be studying. So what should your target score be? I'm sure a lot of you are wondering that. What should the goal score that I set for myself be? Well, first, don't let your diagnostic score influence your decision making. It's possible to go from the lowest starting score to the highest finishing score. People make sizable score increases. So don't let the diagnostic score, whatever it is, hamper your target score. Instead, you should be guided by the law schools you want to go to. You should set a target score that will make you a competitive applicant for the schools you're interested in attending. And to figure out what that score is, look for the median LSAT score that's been released by those schools. Most of us want to aim for the 50th percentile median LSAT score posted in the most recent year by each law school. Some of us might need to kind of adjust that a little bit. For instance, if our GPA falls beneath the 50th percentile median GPA for the school we want to attend, maybe we want to aim for actually the 75th percentile median LSAT score. But for the most part, the target score should be about that 50th percentile LSAT score for the school we want to attend. So many of you told me about the schools you wanted to attend, so we can go over some target scores right now. So I know a real popular one for a lot of us, I saw it multiple times in the chat section. A very prestigious law school, their 50th percentile LSAT score is a 172. Saw a number of us also select Georgetown. Technically a law center, not a law school. believe they're the only legal education institution in America that calls themselves as a law center rather than a law school or school of law. Interesting tidbit, but probably more relevant tidbit for you is what your target score should be. 50th percentile at Georgetown is 171. Saw a number of people refer to both UCLA and USC, two Los Angeles law schools. UCLA's median is 170 and USC's median is 168. See, let's get some more regional variety in there. We'll get some other people say, let's see, got U of A, University of Arizona. What is their median LSAT score? University of Arizona is a 163. Also saw BYU in there. What is their median LSAT score? It's like 167. So went over some of the LSAT scores that you have set. Oh, got a few more requests. Georgia State. Let's see. Georgia State 160. And UPenn, this will be the last one. You can look these up on your own. Just make sure you're looking up the most recent. 171. Yeah. Number of our targets, whatever it might be, that we're aiming for. And I do want to be clear, if you don't make the median score, that doesn't mean you can't get in. This is just the goal we're setting for ourselves. All this 50th percentile median score means is it's the score that at least 50% of the students achieve. So if you look at NYU, 50% of their students earn a 172 or higher, and 50% of their students earn less than a 172. So clearly there's a lot of people who get into NYU who do not earn a 172. But you want to have that 172 when you apply to NYU, because that means you're going to be a very competitive applicant. Some scores, when they come across the desk at the admissions officer at NYU, they're not even going to give you a second look, unfortunately. You have a certain combination of a GPA and LSAT score that is not up to their standards. They might not take a very serious look at your application. But if you have a 172 at NYU and you have a good enough GPA, they're going to take a close look at your application. You're going to be a competitive applicant at that school, and you might even get some scholarship money too. So that's why we're setting this at the as our target scores. It's not necessary to get in, but it will make us very competitive. And Sakshi asks, what if your GPA isn't the greatest? Is it still possible to get into the school with a great LSAT score? Yeah, so if your GPA isn't up to the median GPA at these schools, then you want to kind of aim for a slightly higher LSAT score. Maybe instead of going for the 50th percentile median, you go for the 75th percentile median. That's a score that 75% of the school earns less than. So for instance, for NYU, the 75th is a 174. So if you want to go to NYU and you don't have a GPA that's as high as their median GPA, that's what you set as your target score. But I will say, Sakshi, that it's far more common to get into law schools with a comparatively high LSAT score and a comparatively low GPA. In the kind of LSAT law school admissions community, we refer to that as a splitter. You have a high LSAT score, low GPA. For most schools, that's going to make you a more competitive applicant than what's referred to as a reverse splitter, someone with a comparatively low LSAT score and a comparatively high GPA. law schools, most law schools at least, value the LSAT more than your GPA. So we set some target scores for ourselves. Now what's next in our study plan? Well, we've got to figure out how long the whole process is going to take. And in order to do that, simply subtract your diagnostic score from your target score to see how big of a score increase you're trying to make. That'll give you a good idea of how long you should reserve for studying. For only attempting a score increase of between 1 and 10 points, that's the difference between our target score and our diagnostic score, study will probably take 2 to 4 months. It's about 20 hours per week over the course of 2 to 4 months. That's where we get that minimum of 180 hours, by the way. 20 hours a week for 9 weeks is the absolute minimum amount of time we recommend studying for the LSAT. If, however, we're attempting a score increase of between 10 and 20 points, studying may take between 4 and 6 months. And if we're attempting a score increase of more than 20 points, studying may take 6 months or more. That's been my experience working with students. Of course, everyone is different. It may take you less time, it may take you more time to study and earn that score increase that you're aiming to make. But this will let you figure out how long and when to study. For instance, if I knew I was going to be studying for 4 to 6 months, that was the goal that I had, I might plan to study for the LSAT in the late fall and winter. During that time, I know I'll have some breaks from work during Thanksgiving and the winter holiday. Work also slows down for me a bit at the end of the year, which would free up more time. It's not like I'd be missing the best weather, so I won't be missing out from like fun spring and summer stuff. Like that's when I would choose to dedicate those 4 to 6 months. Your schedule might be completely different. For instance, you might prefer to use the summer for studying since you'll be out for school. But knowing how long it's going to take will help you make a plan and pick the best time of year to study. So, given that, let's talk about what a good plan looks like at each stage of our studies. There are, in my opinion, 4 stages of studying for the LSAT. The first is learning the core curriculum. This is where we are introduced to all of the ways the LSAT tests your ability to read, think, and draw like a lawyer. During this stage, we're working through the course, whatever course we chose, and learning all of the material that the 3 scored sections of the LSAT tests. And we'll be getting a lot of repetitive practice through the homework assigned by our course. What we really want to accomplish here is a strong understanding of the material. We're not really worried about doing things quickly. That means all of the work we want to do during this first stage is untimed. What we want to do is develop good habits. Pushing ourselves to go too quick can make it difficult to acquire those good habits. Also not worried at this stage about mastering the material. We just want to start developing a general understanding of what all the different types of games are, all the different types of passages, all the different types of logical reasoning questions. We also want to learn how to approach them and what skills we want to employ when answering them. There are going to be some concepts for us that go very well during this stage, and there's going to be some concepts that could have gone better. The important thing is that we keep track of the concepts that don't go very well for us during this stage. To that end, we want to keep a written list of whatever we're struggling on. That said, don't get stuck on one particular question type or concept. There's a lot to cover. So keep it moving, but catalog what is and isn't working. For that, I recommend using some type of question journal, a physical journal, or a spreadsheet where you keep track of all the questions you miss. You should write out why the answer you selected is incorrect. You should write out why the correct answer is correct, why you answered the question incorrectly, and any solutions you could think of to avoid missing a similar question in the future. At LSAT Max, we think this is so important to the study process that we give all of our tutoring students a spreadsheet to do this. This is so important because at this stage, we're recognizing patterns in the material. We're beginning to see similar ideas of the LSAT tests over and over. The questions are really just, imagine the mannequins, kind of all the same mannequin, but they just put different clothes on them to make them look different. But they're really testing the same stuff. It's the same underlying body of material. So during this stage, what we're doing is we're beginning to learn how to look past those clothes that they put on the mannequins and start seeing the underlying mannequins to develop our understanding. And to that, having a question journal where you reflect on why you missed questions and how we can devise solutions to do better on them, that'll really help us to see that underlying mannequins in these questions. So that's stage number one, learning the core curriculum. We have more on the question journal later. Stage number two, after you finish working through your course, is going to be finalizing untimed practice. After you finish working through the course, you're not quite ready for practice tests yet. In fact, an all too common self-inflicted issue some test takers have is taking practice tests before they're ready to do so. Doing that will only waste the practice test as a resource, discourage you with the not so great score that you might get, maybe even promote some bad habits. We don't want that. So instead, we want to finalize untimed practice by reviewing the concepts that didn't go super well in the first stage. For many of us, that'll amount to reviewing quite a bit of material. But that's okay. If we don't have time to review everything, we want to prioritize concepts that are high yield. Those are the concepts that appear most frequently on the LSAT. Now, any course that you choose to do that's worth its salt will let you know which concepts are the most high yield on this test. Improving on those concepts will therefore help us earn the most significant score increases, a kind of bang for your buck situation. So to get this review, consider looking for advice that can supplement what you learned during stage one. For instance, at LSAT Max, every day we hold supplementary office hours, in which an instructor goes over a particular topic of the LSAT. We also keep all of the recordings accessible to all of our students. So that's the way I recommend a lot of students review, reflect, and supplement their understanding when they're on the second stage of their study prep. That could be a way to review the area that they had some issues working on the first stage. Once you review those areas, take the time to do untimed and open book practice with the areas you struggle with. Drill those concepts over and over again. Keep cataloging the questions you get wrong and why you got them wrong and any solutions you can devise. And eventually, those weaknesses will turn into strengths. That said, we shouldn't ignore any concepts during this phase. Even though we are concentrating on the concepts that didn't go super well in phase one, we still want to keep an eye on, keep practicing these skills that went well during stage one. That's because LSAT skills have an annoying tendency to atrophy quickly. So even if, for instance, logic games went really well for you in stage one, you still want to do some logic games during stage two. You do want to continuously practice it, at least sometimes, to make sure that those skills don't kind of erode during stage two. What we're ultimately looking to do during this stage is to turn the understanding from the previous stage into mastery. Particularly, we want to be a master of anticipation. Expert test takers reliably anticipate what the correct answer will say. They've learned how to read, think, and draw like a lawyer so well, they built a ton of experience through practice so that they know all these tests tricks. Consequently, they can predict what the right answer is going to say for most questions. There's all sorts of benefits to anticipation on this test. It saves time, it reduces confusion, It reduces cognitive load that you're giving yourself as you're taking the test. It makes answer choices easier to read and assess. So if you're going to become a master in stage 2, you need to figure out how to anticipate what the correct answer will say reliably. Now, when are we going to be done with stage 2? And when are we going to be able to actually do practice tests? Well, we want to make sure that before moving on to practice exams, our accuracy when answering questions untimed exceeds the accuracy that our target score requires. Once we start taking practice tests, we'll have to move very quickly. We're approaching this content at test speed, which makes it harder. And we'll make some small mistakes as a result. To account for these mistakes, we want to make sure that our accuracy is a little bit higher than it needs to be to get our target score. There's the general accuracy some common target scores will require. So you know that some of us were saying, okay, we want to go to NYU, our target score is a 172. So how accurate do we need to be? 92, at least. When you do your questions untimed in stage 2, if your target score is a 172, you want to get at least 92% of the questions you do correct. And you really don't want to move on from stage 2 to the next stage until you're consistently getting 92% of your questions correct. Some of us might have a different target score. For instance, some of us might have a target score of 160. Before we move on to stage 2, we want to make sure we're getting at least 75% of the questions we do correct, untimed. If we don't achieve this goal of accuracy, it's going to be really hard to get our target score. Because once we start doing things quickly in practice exams, it's not like we're all of a sudden going to get more accurate. It's not like it's something that moving quickly is going to make the test easier. So we want to make sure that we've confirmed our accuracy in stage 2 when we're doing things untimed before we go on to the next stage and start doing things timed. Once we do hit that accuracy, we can start getting time to practice. Now, some of us might be ready to skip straight to the 4th stage, but most of us will probably need to spend some time hanging out in stage 3. During this stage, we're getting time to practice for the first time in our study process since that diagnostic score that we did at the very beginning. But we don't want to go all the way to test speed. We want to slowly ease ourselves into test speed. That's because for most of us, jumping right into a practice test will be a bit too jarring. We won't finish too much of the test, which is discouraging. We'll try to go too fast and lose some of our hard-won accuracy. Instead, we want to gradually ramp up our speed through a series of timed exercise. Essentially, we want to take small chunks of test material, give ourselves a bit more time to complete that chunk than we'll have on the actual test. So we're working against a clock for the first time, but it's not quite as much test time pressure as we would have on the real test. We can complete that small chunk with our accuracy that our target score requires. We'll then try another chunk of questions. This time we'll give ourselves a little bit less time, just a little bit, slowly and incrementally up our speed until eventually we're at test speed. Once we get to test speed, we're ready for stage 4, and that is practice tests. Taking practice tests is super important. When we do so, we want to make sure we are replicating the test conditions as closely as possible. That means doing the full test. That means taking the same breaks that we have between the sections. You get a 1 to 2 minute break between each section. You get a 10-minute break between the second and third section. However, in addition to replicating the test conditions as closely as we can, we want to make sure that we review the practice tests. A review of the practice tests is even more important than the actual practice tests themselves. Exams will provide us a snapshot of what our skills were on the day that we took that practice test. And the practice tests themselves can help you improve in some small ways, but they don't make the major improvements. The review that we do in between the tests is how we make those improvements. So DDS for the third, to go over the third phase. This is when we're doing time practice, but not doing full practice exams, taking small chunks of questions, giving ourselves more time to do those questions than we'll have on the real test, and seeing if we can complete those chunks of questions and still maintain our accuracy. So that reducing the amount of time we're giving ourselves until we're ready to do it at the speed that the full test is going to require. Once we get to that fourth stage, we're taking practice tests, but most importantly, we're reviewing those practice tests. At minimum, we're going to want to make sure that we're reviewing and logging every question that we missed on the practice test, and every question we're not entirely certain on, even if we eventually got it right. Like we did in the previous stages, we want to write out why the right answer is right, why the wrong answers are wrong, and how we could have better anticipated what the right answer would say. If you miss the question, you also want to devise solutions to avoid missing a similar question in the future. Remember, all the questions are just mannequins. They test the same underlying material. They just put different clothes on the questions, make them look different. So if you can figure out a solution for one question on practice exam, you will have an opportunity probably on the next practice exam that you take to implement that solution. You'll encounter the same underlying mannequin. A part of the solution will involve practice. You're like, oh man, I missed a lot of these questions on this practice test. So I need to review those questions, supplement my understanding of them, get a lot of targeted practice with those questions, mixing out time and on-time practice before the next exam. Now, another way to review your tests, someone would say an even better way to review your tests, is what's commonly referred to as blind review. Now, truth be told, not in love with that term, since the process I'm about to describe is, technically speaking, neither blind nor review, but this is the term that's stuck. It's the one that gets used most prevalently, so it's the term I use. Anyway, this method is proven. It's especially helpful if you have a strong command of the concepts built up through the previous 3 stages. By the way, you may hear from some people who said that the blind review process helped them improve their LSAT score, but they needed to implement it over 50 practice exams or 60 practice exams or all of 90 plus practice exams. That's not necessary. Those people probably didn't have a mastery of this material before beginning the process of blind review. Most of my students who complete the first 3 sections are able to get through this blind review phase in less than 10 exams. Anyway, here's how blind review works. We're gonna take the test once. We're gonna take it as a real test, timed under test-like conditions. But we're not gonna score the test. We're gonna have our selections recorded. We're gonna know what we selected for every single question. We're not gonna score it yet. We're gonna wait a day. The next day, we're going to take the test again, but this time we're taking the test untimed. Now, we're not going to see what we selected the first time we took the test. We're going to go into it again, go through the test again, under no time pressure at all, blind to whatever we selected on the first time, blind to what the correct answer is. We'll try it again. Then we're going to review. We're going to compare what we selected the first time when it was timed to what we selected the second time when it was untimed. Did we keep the same answer? In that case, great job. We understand that question. We confirm we understand it by getting it right a second time. No worries there. However, if we changed our response and got it right on the second time, then we probably have a timing issue. We probably got it wrong the first time we took the test because we were going too fast, or we didn't give ourselves enough time to take it, or we made a little error as a result of the timing issue. In that case, we want to determine what we could have done to better anticipate what the right answer would have said, because that helps our speed more than anything. If we have many timing issues, over our review of a practice test, what we want to do is get some timed practice. Maybe go back to stage 3 for a little bit, improve our time, and then go back to stage 4. Sometimes what happens is what we do is we get it right on the first time, and then get it wrong on the second time, which means that after we spent more time with the question, we got tricked by it. Determine in that case what tricked you, how you plan to avoid falling for that trick again. You considered if you got tricked many times on a test that you're reviewing, consider getting more on-time practice to reinforce your understanding of the material. You get it wrong both times, and there's probably an understanding issue. You don't understand that question very well. What's hard about it? How do we misapproach that question? How do we misunderstand that question? And how do we plan on fixing that issue? For these, it might actually involve going back to the core curriculum and reviewing that question type. It might involve bolstering some skills that we need for that particular question through a deep dive review, getting a lot of targeted, untimed practice on that. So to show you how this works, let me give you guys a real LSAT question. We're gonna do that question twice. First time we're gonna do that question, I am only giving you the amount of time that question probably should take on a test, which, fortunately for you, is gonna be about a minute. So I'm gonna put a question on the board. I want you to all try to answer it in a minute. This is going to mimic the first part of the blind review, which is when we take the test under timed, test-like conditions. So I'm putting the question up now. You have, I sometimes give people 30 seconds to do this. I'm going to give you a minute. You have 1 minute. Let me know which answer choice you think is right in the chat section. All right, that was 1 minute. What are we going with, everyone? Put your selections in the section. By the way, it's a really hard question. I would not expect you to get it right. You haven't been studying for this app for very long. If you don't feel comfortable sharing your selection with everyone, that's okay. Just keep it to yourself. Now, if this were a real test, we're really doing blind review, wait 24 hours. This time, we're not going to do that. We're just going to try it again. Take as long as you need to complete this. Take a few minutes to complete this, and then we'll go over it. Think about whether you want to change your answer or keep the answer you selected. All right, so now we've had a bit more time to review this question. What happened? Did you change your answer? Did you keep the same answer? What was your initial answer and which one did you change it to if you changed it to a different one? I'm not going to give a full recap of this question, but quickly, our goal in this question is to find the answer choice that weakens this geologist's argument, that makes it less convincing. So the first thing we have to do is understand the geologist's argument. This geologist is talking about petroleum that's deep within the Earth's crust. And this geologist says, well, there's kind of two theories of where this petroleum came from. There's the dominant theory, it came from the fossils of plants and animals. But then there's this challenger view. There are carbon deposits from the formation of the Earth, or old carbon deposits that actually created this petroleum. Which one does the author buy? Which one does this geologist think is true? The important thing to realize is that this geologist concludes that their theory, the challengers, their theory is refuted. Theirs is wrong because there's biomarkers in the petroleum. These biomarkers, and biomarkers does not sound like carbon. Biomarkers sounds like plants and animals, living things. So yes, I agree, Judy. Geologists is on the dominant view side. They think it's fossil plants and animals that led to this petroleum because we see biomarkers in petroleum. But what do biomarkers tell us? There's molecules that indicate the past or present existence of living organisms. To weaken arguments, we want to think about why is the argument weak in the first place? Why is it not a convincing argument? And in brief, this is why. It's a weak argument. The geologist forgets, despite telling us that the biomarkers just tell us what's in the petroleum right now. The biomarkers are not necessarily evidence of what made the petroleum. The biomarker just might be evidence of what's in the petroleum right now. And that's why D is the one that's going to weaken this. Certain strains of bacteria thrive deep within the Earth's crust. Well, yeah, if there's certain strains of bacteria that are deep in the Earth's crust, we could have that bacteria in the petroleum. And all the biomarkers might be telling us is that there's bacteria in the petroleum. Not what the petroleum came from, not that the petroleum was the product of fossils of plants and animals, but just that there's bacteria in there now, present day. And that is going to be one of the weakens the argument. So what happened here in this blind review process? When you had more time, you select the right answer, even though initially you didn't? Well, then it'd be a timing issue. Did you get it wrong on both attempts? Well, then it's an understanding issue. Understandable, because this is a really hard question. You haven't started studying for the LSAT yet. Maybe there's something in here that tricked you out of the right answer. You had it right on the first time, took a longer look. There's something in an answer choice that attracted you to it, and you selected it wrong. That would be a trick issue. Figure out what trick, how to avoid it. But in essence, what I wanted to do here was not, tell you that you can't do a question like this. It was just to illustrate the blind review process, and also to allow you to get some exposure to some challenging LSAT material so you know what you're up against. All right, so now you've seen how challenging an LSAT question can be. We're going to talk about, because there's going to be a few things we're going to have to address in our study plan so that we can consistently get questions like the one we just did, correct? And as we saw, there are 4 full stages of the study plan we'll have to work through. In order to make sure that we can get through each stage, we have to be consistent in our practice. Remember, we can't cram for this test. It takes time to train ourselves. We're wiring our brains to identify patterns. It's difficult, learnable, as long as we study regularly. So what does studying regularly look like? Well, the ideal schedule is about 20 hours per week, spread out over as many days as we can. This is what studying consistently looks like. For most, the sweet spot is about 3 to 4 hours a day for 5 or 6 days each week. Don't try to push all your study time to the weekends. Trying to study for more than 4 hours a day risks burnout. Studying for more than 6 hours a day risks building bad habits. If you're trying to study for more than 8 hours a day, I mean, there's really no point. Your mind will be so tired and twisted that you won't really get too much out of it. It's better to study a little bit every day than a lot on just one day. We also want to be consistent with how we study. Anyone here heard about the phenomenon called state-dependent learning? Has anyone taken a psychology course or anything like that? Learn about state-dependent learning? Oh, yeah. Maybe you've heard about it too much. Forgive me for describing it, but it's a heavily researched phenomenon that says more or less that you'll be better at applying information if you are in the same mindset, mood, physical location as when you learned that information. So harness that to your advantage. You'll find much more success if you try to get into the same headspace and physical space where you study. And keep that consistent too. Study in the same location. Study in the same headspace to the extent that we can control that. Study with the same strategies. However, let's not take this idea of consistency too far. We need to take at least some days off. We need to let our brain process the information we're learning. We need to recharge the old mental gas tank. We need to make sure we have time to do the things that make us happy and healthy humans. So one day off per week is not only acceptable, but I'd encourage it. For the overachieving type, try taking one day off every other week. That can still be a good idea. We don't want to really overdo it. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. We need to take some days off along the way. But at the same time, even with days off, 20 hours a week is a huge commitment. Finding those 20 hours every week can be challenging if you're a full-time student or worker. As I said previously, though, I've had experience reaching out to many students and helping them find ways to make more time to study for their test. And I've learned a lot of lessons from that experience that I want to impart to you. So if you are a busy person, full class schedule, busy job, major life responsibilities, all of the above, where are you going to find time to work? Well, here are the most common places to find the time. First, before work or before class. Wake up a little bit earlier than you're used to. It's hard at first, and frankly, it's not fun at first, but most of us are able to accommodate to that. You can adjust to a new schedule within a few weeks. So maybe that's one thing we do to make time for the test. Wake up a little bit earlier, we do our work before we go to school, before we go to work. Maybe that's not practical for us for whatever reason. Maybe we want to find time during work breaks between classes. Studying in small increments can be challenging, but we can get a lot done in a little bit of time, on a 15-minute break during work, on a half-hour break between classes. If this is the way you're going to make time, make sure you want to optimize that time by planning on what you're going to cover during those little breaks ahead of time. Okay, I know I have 30 minutes before my stats class, my poli-sci class, so I'm going to use those 30 minutes to address in-out logic games today. Or I know I have this 15-minute break. I know I'm going to review these questions for my practice exam during those 15-minute breaks. Making sure that you know what you're going to do ahead of time allows you to get the most out of these breaks between work and class. Another option is after work. Dedicate an hour or two after work to study for the exam. By the way, now that a lot of us are going back to the office right now, we're experiencing the not so fun rush hour commute. It's gonna be a great way to avoid that. So you know what? I go to the office and I stay there or go to a coffee shop or wherever for a few hours after work. I wait out the rush hour. I use that time productively to study for the LSAT. And now I get to go home and not take so much time in the car. So that can make a kind of cursed commute a little bit better. Another thing we can do is before bed. Can't wake up earlier. Maybe consider staying up later. Only recommended if you're a night owl, but if you want to push your studying into the evening, that's another way to make time for the test. The point is that if we only try to study in the time that we have, we might not be able to get to that 20-hour-a-week goal that we want to set for ourselves. So in order to make sure that we can get those 20 hours, we might need to make time for a little bit. How are we going to make that time? How are we going to free up extra time to reach that 20-per-hour-week goal? Well, part of it's going to be making sacrifices, giving up certain things that we do. Now, making these sacrifices is not easy, but it is an investment. It can be one that provides great returns, since improving your LSAT score can translate to big bucks. Your earning potential can change in major ways with a better LSAT score. Based on a study, those who score higher than a 170 on their LSAT earn, on average, $33,000 more in their first year of practicing law than those who earned a 160. Those who earn a 160 earn on average $38,000 more in their first year of practicing law than those who had earned a 150. Plus, if you get significantly above a school's median LSAT, you may get a whole lot of financial aid up to a full ride in some circumstances. So yes, making temporary sacrifices is not going to be fun, but maybe there are certain things in your life that you can live without, at least temporarily. Maybe there are some sacrifices you can make to free up this time and earn that life-changing, door-opening, money-earning LSAT score. At the very least, if you're serious about starting your legal career, it's something to consider. But we shouldn't sacrifice things that are going to jeopardize our emotional, spiritual, physical, or financial well-being. So I'm not recommending that anyone quit their job, study for the test, but I'll give you an example of a few sacrifices I would and wouldn't make if I had to study for the test today. So I wouldn't give up personally exercise. I need that for my physical and mental health. But there's certain habits I have with exercising. I like to run, but I like to drive to a different neighborhood to run in than the neighborhood I live in. There's nicer trees and stuff to look at. Also like to skateboard. I mentioned that earlier. Sometimes drive to the other side of the city I live in to skateboard with friends. Once a week at least, I'll drive almost an hour to surf too. So yeah, I'll continue exercising, but maybe I would only run and skate my neighborhood, so I'm not eating up as much time doing it. Maybe I'd only surf on my days off that I give myself every week or every other week. Also, I can't give up my job, that financially, but I work remotely, and sometimes I take longer breaks in the middle of the day to run errands, or eat lunch, or work out. Those are nice, but they make the workday spread out a little bit earlier and a little bit later. So I'd sacrifice those. So I'm working as close to 9 to 6 as possible. So I have more time before and after my job to study for the LSAT. I'm also a nerd, and I honestly probably spend an hour or two in the evenings doing things like crosswords and Wordle and reading and stuff like that. Those would probably be completely sacrificed in the name of study time. Now, your lifestyle is probably less boring than mine, so your sacrifices will probably be very different than the ones that I went over. But the point is, you know your schedule better than anyone else. You know yourself better than anyone else. When it's time to study, you want to really honestly assess what you can and cannot live without in your schedule and sacrifice those things you can live without to make time for studying for the LSAT. Not the most fun thing to go over, but it is an important thing that we should all start thinking about. Once we make some sacrifices, free up some time, the next step is actually using that time to study for the LSAT, and that can be just as difficult. After working through thousands of students, I've got a pretty good idea of what helps people honor their commitment to the LSAT. The biggest lesson I've learned is that it's so much easier to accomplish little tasks than big ones. Now, make no mistake, improving your LSAT score is a big task. But if you just sit there with get a better LSAT score, or even like improve at logic games on our to-do list, accomplishing that task will feel overwhelming and intimidating. Easy to punt those overwhelming and intimidating things to the next day. So rather than big tasks, break studying the LSAT down to small tasks, ones that are easy to accomplish. Instead of work on logic games on Tuesday, review the lesson video for in-out games and complete 4 in-out games and log my results into the question journal. By breaking down a big task into several smaller tasks, it's a great way to stick to a study plan. And not only is it a great way to stick to that study plan, it can also be very motivating. Getting to tick off each small item on a list makes us feel like we're progressing. And that's an important feeling to sustain as we're studying for this task. So when we make time for the test, we also want to make sure that we are actually using that time to study for the test. Making commitments and making those commitments small, accomplishable tasks is the best way to ensure that we're getting that study time or staying motivated through that study time. And now that takes us to the final point, final study principle. Even with the best plan, the most consistent execution of that plan, there will be hitches. Mainly, we're going to be answering a lot of questions incorrectly when we study for the LSAT. So we want to learn to embrace mistakes during this process. Without getting into the right mindset, getting all of the questions wrong that we're going to get wrong in our study plan will be a demoralizing experience. We might feel punished. We might feel like we're letting ourselves down. So we do not want to have the wrong mindset. So first of all, let's start by saying that getting many questions wrong is not only normal, it's universal when studying for the LSAT. No one studying for this test gets all of the questions correct. It's baked into the test itself. Earning the average score on the LSAT entails missing about 40% of the questions. So there's no reason to get down on ourselves for missing questions. It's built into the design of the test. But we really want to improve to switch our mindset. We can do that in 2 ways. We want to learn to embrace mistakes and embrace learning from mistakes. We'll also want to learn to accept progress in all of its forms. So what do I mean by those 2 things? What do I mean when I say I want to embrace mistakes and embrace learning from mistakes? So this first point, we learn to not only tolerate mistakes, but also to get excited by missed questions. Because missed questions is how we learn about ourselves, our habits, and how we devise solutions. So we want to make sure that any question we miss at any stage in our study plan, we're logging that question into some kind of question journal, whether it's a physical journal or a spreadsheet, whether it's one that we give you at LSAT Max, whether it's one you create yourself. It's important that we're logging that material because that's going to help us devise solutions. By logging the material, we get to retrace our steps, figure out where we were led astray, and avoid making those similar mistakes in the future. After time, we'll start to make fewer and fewer mistakes. By forcing ourselves to reflect on the mistakes when we log our missed questions, we also get to reflect on the solutions. And that will make applying those solutions easier and making score increases more efficient. The second point, we need to appreciate our progress in all of its form. Score increases happen, but they take time. If the only thing that we're using to measure our progress is the score increase, we might get burnt out. So instead, we want to find other sources of personal pride as we take this test. Find little milestones along the way, like a multi-day streak of sticking to your study plan. Or maybe there was an increased accuracy on a certain question type. Or maybe you successfully incorporated a solution you thought of into an actual question. Like, oh yeah, I noticed these 2 questions were very similar. The first time I got it wrong, I made a solution, I applied that solution, and now I got this question right. It's just one question, but guess what? That's progress. Learning to accept progress in all of its forms even if it's small, even if it feels minor, taking personal pride in that, maybe even rewarding ourselves for the small things that we want to do along the way, that is really, really helpful. The more we appreciate those footsteps up the mountain, the easier it will be to summit the mountain. And that's the last point I wanted to convey here, just that change in mindset. I think it's an under-discussed, but very important part of studying for the LSAT. And those are the 4 big points that I wanted you all to take away from this. Now we'll talk about LSAT Max. So that is our presentation on how to study for the LSAT. Hopefully now you know a whole lot more about how the LSAT works and how to prepare for it than you did about an hour and 20 minutes ago. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, I think LSAT Max is the way to go for studying for the LSAT. Looked at the other courses. I think LSAT Max provides the most for our students at the best price. That's great, Tony. With the discount, I'll discuss in a little bit. You are going to definitely be getting the best price for LSAT Max. But how does LSAT Max provide you with the most support? Well, when you enroll in LSAT Max, you get instant access to hundreds of hours of video lessons. That's for the core curriculum part of our study process. Those lessons focus on teaching you all the skills you need to crush the LSAT. We'll also provide you with a study calendar to help you structure your prep, so you can stay on task, hit your target score, to the consistency matters point we discussed. You'll also get access to all 90 full-length LSATs produced by LSAC. That's to the practice test part of the process. They say practice makes perfect, which is why we also give you all 9,000 LSAT questions and sort the questions by question type, so you can get targeted practice when going through the core curriculum or going through the second part, finalizing the core curriculum. One thing that truly sets us apart is our analytics. We track your performance each time you answer a question, either in homework or in practice tests, which allows you to pinpoint your strengths and weaknesses. Very relevant for a few of the study steps we talked about today. This will allow you to spend your time practicing on the things you really need to improve on, so that you'll see major score increases. So you use your time wisely to address the high yield areas you need to do. And it also makes it really important to us that you feel supported, so we make our awesome instructors accessible to you. Every day we hold hour-long office hour sessions, so you can get all of your questions answered by someone who scored in the 99th percentile of the LSAT. If office hours aren't your thing, that's okay. You can connect someone through real-time chat we offer, through the message boards we offer that are monitored by that same 99th percentile instructors. We also just launched a Discord that I personally monitor. So if you want a direct line to me as you're studying with LSAT Max, you can use that. If you want more specialized attention, want tutoring, our packages come with a complimentary hour of tutoring. You can purchase extra hours as needed. You'll be tutoring with the best in the business, like I mentioned earlier. They all scored in the 99th percentile. But something that's really important to me when I hire instructors is that they're not naturals. They didn't start with a high score. They learned the test in depth. They devised solutions to get a good score. And now that they can pass on those solutions to our students. So I make sure that every instructor I hire is someone who had to learn this test, someone who understands this test on a deep level, and someone who's really good at communicating those lessons to their students in a simple, understandable way. So that is the presentation. I want to thank you all again for hanging out with me this afternoon. Hope you all learned a lot. Hope you all feel confident you all have a good study plan. However you choose to study for the LSAT, I want to wish you the best of luck. Now that we've finished with our presentation, I'll answer some of the questions that we dropped in the Q&A section. This is it for you. If you didn't ask any questions, I want to thank you again. Wish you well. Good luck studying for the LSAT. But for those questions, I'll go ahead and answer them now. I'll go ahead and put some, while I'm answering the questions, I will show you some of the testimonials from some of our past students. All right. First question I'm seeing is from Tyler Durbin. Tyler says, what resources does LSAT Max have for untimed practice questions? We have a lot. So we break down in our course all the different question types in logical reasoning, logic games, and reading comp. We have study sections for each of those that are accompanied by a video lesson. We'll teach you the strategies and you can get some practice answering some questions during those lessons. Each section also has homework. So real LSAT questions that you just learned about in the lesson video. You can get untimed practice on those. We also have an analytics section that tells you how well you're doing on every single question type. If you want to get practice on any of those question types, well, you can just click into the question that you want to address your analytics page, and then you'll have a ton of questions sorted there for you to get untimed practice on. So really, any single LSAT question that's ever been released, we have it accessible on our account, so you can do it on time if you want. We also have it accessible if you want to do it timed. If you get to the third or fourth stages in your study plan, and now you're starting to do some time practice. So really, a lot of resources for untimed practice. Any question you can do untimed as many times as you need to learn the question. Next question is from Leah Fuller. Leah asks, the schools I'm aiming for have a median LSAT score of 161. I'm wanting scholarships. How much higher should I make my target? To really be competitive for scholarships, I would aim for higher than the 75th percentile median score. So if the schools have a 50th percentile median score of 161, my guess is their 75th percentile median score is probably around 164. I would aim higher than that. If you're above the 75th percentile median score, you're someone who is going to raise the median scores for that school. They want that. They want a higher median LSAT score because that's good for rankings and attracting more students and all of that. So if you want scholarships, definitely want to aim for higher than the 75th percentile median score. The more you can get above that 75th percentile median score, the more likely you are to get those scholarships. Next question is from Kimberly. Kimberly asks, what target score should a person strive for if they plan to take the LSAT in a state that doesn't require them to attend law school to practice law? I mean, whatever your target score is what's going to get you into the school that you want to go to. If you're not going to law school, you don't need to take the LSAT. I know a lot of states have like apprenticeship programs that allow you to take a version of the bar exam and practice law under the tutelage of an attorney. If that's something you're interested in doing as opposed to law school, I would research that thoroughly to make sure that's the right route for you. That is the route you take. If you don't attend law school, you don't need to take the LSAT. But if you are going to attend law school, you just want to look at the schools that you want to go to. Think about location. If you know which state you want to practice in, look at the law schools in that state. Pick one that you think is going to give you the best chance to both pass the bar and earn a job after graduating law school, and see which their median LSAT scores is and set that as your target score. Kimberly also asks, are there certain LSAT study guides better for novices to use? So all LSAT study guides that I'm aware of presume that you do not know anything about the LSAT when you start studying. So they're all appropriate for novices. You just want to find the one that makes the most sense to you, both in terms of how they teach the material and also in terms of the resources they provide for you. So we all approach the LSAT assuming that our students will not know anything about the LSAT or the material that the LSAT tests. So we're all good for novices, but are we right for you is the question you want to address when picking an LSAT course. So I encourage you to check them out and see the one that is the best for you, both in terms of how it teaches the LSAT and also in terms of how the resources are provided to the students. So if you want to check out LSAT Max, go ahead and go to our website. Go ahead and sign up for a free course and get a sense for how we teach LSAT if it makes sense for you. I'm actually not, you asked another question about a reference. I'm actually not familiar with that, so I can't answer that. LSAT Max, though, is a comprehensive program, so you don't really need any supplemental material as you're doing it. Tyler asked, what's the LSAT Prep Plus membership? So that's something that comes with our course. You can kind of see it right here. That is a license that you get from the Law School Admissions Council, who write and administer the LSAT, and it allows you access to a website called Law Hub. And on this website, you can take a bunch of LSAT practice tests in the exact format that those tests will be administered on the real LSAT. So LSAT Max, we have our own practice test software on our app. It mimics very closely the real one, but it's not the exact same as the real one. The LSAT Prep Plus membership allows you access to Law Hub, where you can take practice tests in the exact format of the real test. Now, the advantage of that, obviously, is that you're getting experience with the interface that you use on the real test. The downside is that when you take a test on Law Hub, it just tells you your score and which ones you got right and wrong. It doesn't give you the explanations for every question that we provide at LSAT Max. This is an anonymous question. Do graduate degrees mean much in the application? I know that they look at the undergraduate GPA and LSAT heavily. Yeah, so when you take when you're applying to law school, they're going to calculate, and by they, I mean Law School Admissions Council, they calculate your GPA, and they calculate your GPA based on the undergrad courses that you took. And that tends to be the GPA that the law schools look at and weigh most heavily. Graduate degrees do mean something, though. They might look at your graduate GPA as maybe not as significantly as they look at your undergraduate GPA, but it might factor in their decision making. Additionally, law schools are all about trying to build a diverse class. People with many different experiences, people with many different backgrounds, people with many different work histories. So part of that graduate degree just might differentiate yourself to the other people applying to that law school. And it might be attractive and then build a kind of diverse class of students. Tony asked a question about kind of the study calendars we offer at LSAT Max. Yeah, so what I would recommend, Tony, if you want to break up those videos and drills over a couple of days, absolutely, you can do that. If you also want to get an alternative study calendar, you can hit me up. You can email me, it's just ross@testmaxprep.com. And I can give you an alternative schedule that can hopefully make progressing through the course a little bit more manageable. So if you're interested in that, just let me know. I'll be happy to provide you with that alternative study plan. All right, looks like those are all of the questions. Thank you again for hanging out with me, learning about the LSAT study process. Oh wait, one more question. Kenneth jumped the gun a little early, my bad. Kenneth asks, does time since graduating undergrad matter? Be almost 10 years between undergraduate graduation and going to law school. My undergrad GPA was subpar, but does 10 years of work experience help offset that coupled with a strong LSAT score? Yeah, I would definitely say for tests, it depends on, I mean, can't speak universally for law schools, but I imagine most law schools would perhaps look at your work history a little bit more and your undergraduate GPA a little bit less if it has been many years since your undergrad. For your particular case, Kenneth, I think constructing an application narrative where you're saying, okay, yes, this was my undergraduate GPA back then, I understand, but here's my work experience. I'm going to highlight that work experience in the resume I offer. I'm also going to talk about how that makes me a unique and interesting candidate in my personal statement. Your letters of recommendation are going to be from employers, supervisors of yours, and will speak to your hard work ethic. You couple that with a really strong LSAT score, the narrative that application is going to tell law schools is that you're a different person now when you earn that LSAT score, when you've been working for the last 10 years than you were when you earned that undergraduate GPA. And I think that can be a compelling narrative to convey on your law school application, and maybe can help minimize the impact of a less than ideal GPA. All right. So now I think that's all the questions. Thanks again from all of us at LSAT Max. I want to thank you for attending, listening, participating, all of that. Best of luck on your studies, however you choose to study for the LSAT, but I hope to see you all in our program, at our office hours, on our message boards, and all of that. I wish you the best time of studying. Thank you for your time today.